Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, it's quite weird with the microphone. I'm just testing it for the first time, and I forgot the clicker. 1 second. Thank you, Cole. Thank you very much for coming to our talk. As explained, I represent the World Economic Forum, and within the forum specifically, a digital product called the Global Collaboration Village. And what the Village is a forum initiative in partnership with Accenture and powered by Microsoft Mesh. The content of this talk is to really go into some case studies that show you how leaders in government and business are leveraging the technology to actually further their purpose-driven aims. So before diving a little bit more deeply into that, I want to start off with a video, very short, 3 minutes, that tells you a little bit more about who we are, what we do, and how we do it.
When it comes to immersive experiences, XR, VR, however you want to describe it, before it was just simply a novel experience. Soon it became a gaming experience. But now it's one where you can discuss key global issues across the world.
The metaverse is one of the areas where technology is clearly advancing, and our goal is to make it technology that really serves people.
The Global Collaboration Village is a practical realization of the vision to use the new technologies, such as the metaverse, to make those collaboration processes seamless and to open them up, giving the opportunity to everyone to contribute to solutions.
We cannot, as individuals, run across the world at any given time. The metaverse allows you, by bringing the virtual and the physical worlds together, to solve more challenges than if we rely only on a call or physical meetings.
The Global Collaboration Village breaks outside of the confines of Davos, outside of the confines of this one single week that we can all get together in, and it makes this a truly global collaboration platform that can run throughout the year.
If you think about the convening power of the World Economic Forum, and then underpin that with this groundbreaking technology focused on purpose, we're going to be developing at scale and at speed new solutions for world problems in new ways that are much more inclusive.
We can have the best scientists at any moment providing their ideas. We can have civil society leaders, everybody interacting.
The Global Collaboration Village was created in partnership with Microsoft and Accenture to bring voices all across the world into an immersive experience, from virtual rainforests to the polar ice caps. Immersing them in this 3D environment allows them to collaborate more and retain more information.
We're able to bring together business leaders and governmental leaders and large organizations around the world from across the entire supply chain, and allowing them to see how one disruption can impact the world and then find ways to work together.
Once our partners have experienced it, they begin to say, I can use this to really meet the challenges of my business.
We have built it with the same premise that the World Economic Forum is built, which is to bring society, from governments to not-for-profits to companies, together to be able to collaborate.
There's a lot of benefit in joining the Global Collaboration Village. It will enable you to stay connected with everything that the World Economic Forum is doing 52 weeks a year, and use the technology to pursue all of the goals that really are at the heart of the World Economic Forum's mission.
Okay, so that's a little bit of a taste. And one of the things we say when we're introducing the village to new constituents or to new partners, which is what we call members of our community, is that it very much is a show rather than tell initiative. So as I show you some of the experiences within the village, I want you to know that in 2D, it doesn't look quite as cool as an immersion, but we're hoping that one of the outcomes of this talk will be to be able to formulate connections when we can eventually get you all into headsets and see if we can find intersections between the work we're doing, improving the state of the world using the technology, and the excellent work that you all already are undertaking. So in alphabetical order, this is our advanced manufacturing and supply chain hub. And what this experience tries to do is to help people to visualize the complexities of the manufacturing process and to interact within a factory, and it's used as a training tool for some of our partner communities, and more about that a little bit later. The central campus is really the jumping off point for the village. So the first time you enter, you're likely going to enter into the central campus before shooting off to the other spaces, which are either built around themes like climate change, energy transition, manufacturing, or which relate more specifically to the individual partners, members of our community, whose case studies we'll be talking about together. This is our most data-rich environment called the Climate Tipping Points Hub. And the goal of this space is to be able to decomplexify scientific communication, communication around climate. There obviously is not a shortage of details around climate change and Arctic warming, but getting people to engage with it and understand it in a way that really motivates them to action is at the heart of what this experience is helping us achieve. The cultural experience, or the Amazon experience, is something that we created in partnership with Rafiq Anadol, who's a media artist and a designer. And it combines quite a few pieces: Gen AI, music, the voices and faces of indigenous communities in the Amazon. And what we contend, our hypothesis, which we're validating every day, is that if you take people to these hard-to-reach or impossible-to-reach places, it's much more powerful in getting them to think about the issues and act on the issues, more than if you just give them a report or show it to them in 2D. The energy experience is really showing the work that the forum, with its partners, businesses and organizations, are undertaking to make the energy transition sustainable and successful. And the Ocean Hub is the first experience that we ever launched. And this is really based on marine health and to talk about aquaculture. It was launched at AM23, which I think a lot of people will know as Davos 2023. We call them the annual meetings. And this was the first time when we said to our constituents from business, from government, civil society, look, you need to be able to take people to impossible places. You need to be able to give them a perspective that they couldn't otherwise get, as sort of a conversation activator to give them an insight they might not otherwise be able to receive, and then to prompt them to action. And the stakeholder campus is really going to be at the heart of what I want to talk about, how specific governments and businesses, you can see some of the logos there, they'll bring to us a problem and say, look, we're facing challenge X. We want you to curate an environment for us that we can leverage, a VR environment within the ecosystem of the World Economic Forum that allows us to make progress towards those specific goals. And we can talk a little bit more about what those goals are in the case study section. The town hall, I think everyone is familiar with what that is. That's likely the most customizable part of the village. So our partners, our community will come to us and say, look, we have our own slides, we have our own videos, but we want to take the friction out of meetings, right? Booking venues, getting visas, getting flights. And we want all our key stakeholders, whether they're participants or speakers, to be able to meet in an equitable way and really meet whenever we want them to connect and dive deeper into a specific issue. So before I move on to the case study specifically, I want to talk about how we see the role of XR. The village is actually currently just VR, but we're trending towards XR. And the way that we analyze it is across 4 pillars. The first pillar is trust, and trust specifically in technology. A lot of the times when you talk about new tech, the conversations we're hearing is, oh, great, more new tech. You told us the internet was going to be great, but now look how it's been manipulated by bad actors, misinformation, disinformation. Or, oh, look, great. Remember when you told us that the smartphone was going to be the game changer for everything, and having a computer in your pocket was going to be wonderful, but are we really more connected as a community? So we think about that very much when we're talking about the value that the technology can bring. And trust in technology, we measure it after every experience. To what extent do you feel you were able to express yourself authentically? To what extent did you feel that you were in a neutral place, you know, that there wasn't a bias from place X or a bias from culture Y, and that you were on a neutral ground in which you could talk? To what extent did you feel like your data and your IP would be respected and you could have these really crucial conversations? That's the first thing we measure. Then we measure engagement, because when the village was launched, which was actually at the 2022 annual meeting, we were at the tail end of COVID and there was very much video conferencing fatigue. I think everyone is familiar with this. You knew that camera off means attention was pretty much off. No one was paying attention. But we also know that you need people to engage with a topic before they can care about it. And that's been the value that we've seen through the village, especially when you get people into headset, especially when they have the controllers. They almost have no choice but to engage because you're moving around, you're launching live simulations, you're actively involved in the topic. The third pillar that we looked at was insight. To what extent is being immersed in VR, in the thematic environments like I've showed you, changing how someone thinks about a topic? Everyone in this room, everyone globally will have heard or have at least a basic understanding of climate change. But the actions around addressing that issue are not keeping pace with the urgency. And so we're saying, can we get people to think a different way about an issue that can't be achieved in 2D or through a report? And does that lead to action? And then the final pillar is commitment to action. This is the one that takes the longest to measure because we don't pretend that a 20-minute headset experience is going to result in, the signing of a new law into effect anywhere in the world. But we know that it does actually make people want to mobilize their resources to be able to reach out and to connect with one another. And that's very important. So now we're going to go through the case studies. I'll show 5 case studies to you in alphabetical order, and really just without going too much into detail, talk about the problem and the solution and the impact that members of our community have seen. The village has 150 community members. We call them village partners, from business, from government, and these 2 pillars make up probably about 85%, and then also civil society organizations, as well as cultural institutions and academia, so universities in the main. Aramco came and said, look, we're working on a safe and inclusive and sustainable energy transition. We're known for something different. And the content, whether it's energy technology or carbon capture or carbon storage, is really complicated. How can we make it that our stakeholders, the people who care about Aramco and Aramco's work, can understand the breadth of the work that we're undertaking and the initiatives that we're pushing forward towards these goals? So they created a space, so you can see the inside and the outside of it. That will be what I'll show you across all of them. And within that, they had 3D assets that they launched. Oh, are you interested in energy technology? Visualize it in this way. Are you interested in carbon capture? Visualize it in this way. Are you interested in carbon storage? All those topics were shown in a visual way. And the feedback that came back was, this was great because it allowed us to have everything under one roof, which is important. You don't want to have to transport people to different parts of the country or the world to be able to show that to them. And it also helped to position Aramco as an organization that's really using the latest technology to address the sustainability issues. I talked about Arctic Base Camp very briefly, and I'm actually going to flip back to show you the Climate Tipping Points Hub again, because this is an organization led by a really powerful woman called Dr. Gail Whiteman, who worked with us to bring data into the environment to help people to be able to visualize the problem and then also to be able to take action. So let me see if I can flip back. The Climate Tipping Points Hub, you can see on the right is the data, and on the left is what we call the Earth Simulator. And the problem that Arctic Base Camp wanted to address is there's so much climate communication. It's so complicated, and people are really struggling to grip onto what matters. And for them, for Arctic Base Camp, it was 2 things. Number 1, warming of 1.5 degrees is not a target, it's a physical limit. And it's important that people not conflate the 2. We can't go over 1.5, otherwise the impact will be dire consequences, which of course we want to avoid. That was the first thing. The second thing is they wanted people to understand that when we talk about Arctic warming or polar warming, the impact of what happens in the poles doesn't stay in the poles. It actually reaches out to other parts of the world. So this is the message they wanted to drive home. So we built this Climate Tipping Points Hub with them, and we said, look, as the World Economic Forum, our value is that we convene the top thinkers, we convene the top decision makers, and we put them in a room and say, look, you have these resources, you have these ideas, now let's get out of this siloed way of thinking and have a collaborative approach. And Arctic Base Camp came back to us and said, look, we've made really good progress on being able to show ourselves as climate advocates who do data into action, and also to be able to reach out to other members of the broader community, be that government or business or philanthropy, to help us to achieve our goals. For Interpol, their challenge was, how do we make the global, because Interpol, international police, right? How do we make global law enforcement understand that as physical security threats rise, I don't have to run through them, I think we're all familiar, so the digital security threats are also rising, and that they're interconnected. So Interpol wanted to do 2 things. One, they wanted people to be able to visualize those scenarios through their curated space. This is what can happen, or this is what a cybersecurity scenario looks like. like. And they also wanted to launch a white paper, which they considered a framework for how organizations can work together, law enforcement organizations specifically, to collaboratively address these threats, so that it's not just that what happens in country X, that best practice does not translate to country Y, which is what you actually want. And for Interpol, the impact for that has been they validated that idea that across law enforcement, across legal bodies, across governance, there really is an appetite to work together on addressing these challenges. SAP and Schneider Electric, these are the last two examples that I'm going to talk through. And the context I want to give here is that this pavilion was launched at AM24, so that was about 10 months ago, but the thinking about it started way before that. And so what SAP wanted to do was to position AI as a practical tool that can empower workforces, not replace them, but empower them. We might say in this room, well, obviously, that's been validated. But 16, 18 months ago, that hadn't, and especially amongst communities that might not be as tech forward, as I'm sure a lot of people in this room are. So what they wanted to do is show the power of AI to enhance operational efficiency, and of course, fortify their own position, shall we say, at the forefront of thinking about these problems, how tech can enable businesses to do better. Similarly, for Schneider Electric, what they wanted to talk about is how to drive industrial sustainability. You may recall I showed you before the factory floor. Schneider said, look, we want to show the power of immersive training inside factories. We want to show the power of technology to enhance operational efficiency in a good way. And we want to make sure that it's augmenting workforces rather than replacing them. That was the challenge, and that's what they projected within their own pavilion. And as we looked through all of those, we're always very diligent about measuring. Do we have data, qualitative data? Do we have data, quantitative data, to say that this is worth something? Because sometimes the pushback you'll get from people is, what is the correlation between getting into goofy goggles? Or what is the correlation between putting on dystopian headsets, is how it can sometimes come across from naysayers, an actual real-world impact. And I would argue it starts with how you can get people to feel. And I'll also say, not everyone is a fan. Now, I moved to those quote marks earlier, but it's a conspiracy, it's fine. We put people through the Amazon experience, and we were explained to them that by hearing the voices, seeing the perspectives of these indigenous communities from the Amazon who you wouldn't otherwise be able to engage with, you can get a sense of their perspective, which can build empathy and help you to achieve those goals. This particular person, I'm happy to say they're an outlier, they weren't buying it, but that's okay. This is something that we got. We run internal demos as well with our own stakeholders, and before she had even gotten into headset, she asked me why Iris, was trying to destroy human contact. We're not trying to destroy human contact. And the value over 2D is not always super positive, so there is a little bit of pushback, and we're happy to be sort of authentic about that, right? Because we're on an innovation journey, and we iterate a lot as a team. And the result of that iteration is that we also get the really good comments. This, again, from that same Amazon environment that someone said, nope, it doesn't build empathy. Someone who had gone to the identical experience said, you know what, it's a lot harder to argue about what we should do or if we should do anything at all when you're actually in the Amazon itself, when you're surrounded by the environment you're meant to be trying to protect. Now, that's an intangible outcome, but it really matters. We know from the Climate Tipping Points Hub, which we run pretty much more than anything else because of this power to decomplexify and be run across a number of industries, not just with a climate focus, that people love it as a way to at least activate a discussion around something complicated, especially climate science. And there are tipping points besides the Arctic in the Amazon as well. And one thing that we tried, and which I think was validated as working, is that we ran a virtual meditation session. In New York every September, they have UN Climate Week, and in parallel, we run our own event called the Sustainable Development Impact Meetings, SDIM. And in this virtual meditation session run by this really cool monk called Shoke, people were asked to just go through their thinking and their impact and see if they could connect with themselves and have a sort of vulnerable conversation. And the feedback in the middle of metropolitan New York is, I've never seen this before. I feel so calm and at peace. And the feelings matter, right? Because if you're going to get people to adopt a technology, how they feel when they're using it or when they're inside it is vital. Otherwise, you're really going to struggle with adoption. And beyond the qualitative quotes, we also have numbers as well. This is from the Climate Tipping Points Hub. I think I mentioned that we use it the most. It's our most consistent environment. And we know that when people get into it, it's as good or better than what they expected. They do get a new insight and a new understanding, and they see a lot of application cases, which I think is hugely important in education, in advocacy, in policy. We want to get that 76% up, because we always say, did it help you to understand that 1.5 degrees of warming, it's not a target, it's a limit. We can't go over that. It's not that if we reach it, everything is going to be fine. And the content is clear. So that's maybe the outcomes and the case studies, but I do just want to add another note, because the conversation as well around VR, XR, really lands on infrastructure and headsets a lot of the times. And then people will say, well, that's great, but I don't have a spare, X thousand or X $100 to spend on this. At the AM in 24, so that's Davos 2024, we had a session on climate realities. And what we did was we had the speakers, who are the people who managed, for whatever reason, to get into Davos. And then we had the participants come from all over the world. Mona Lisa was in Zimbabwe, Paula was in Brazil, Eden was in New Zealand, we had someone from Pakistan, Alfred with the really cool green shirt was in Nigeria. Nobody knew where anyone else was. Rather, we said, look, we want to leverage and see if it's true that the technology can make this really equitable, right? So you don't get the haves who get to experience it in person, and then the have-nots who have to watch it on a screen or in 2D. And it was only at the end when we sort of said, look, did you know that none of you is actually in the same place and you're very geographically dispersed? And accessibility is very much at the forefront of our own thinking as well, about how we can scale this tool and use it for purpose-driven intentions. And when we look to the future, this is kind of the last slide that I want to show you. Although I showed you 5 relatively disparate use cases, law enforcement, energy transition, climate change, there is a connective tissue in there that I just want to reinforce before I wrap up. The first is technology as an enabler of pursuit of really key strategic goals. We know that the case for VR, for commercial or for gaming purposes has been made and it's validated. That's no longer a question anymore. But our team really has to work hard to say, okay, how do you take this tool that's known for gaming or that's known from a commercial perspective and show it as being able to bring value to these really big strategic issues? The other thing we want to do in the future is to fortify the link between immersion and interaction, making sure that someone is not just immersed, but they can do something. So in the example of the Climate Tipping Points Hub, they are running themselves individually scenarios. What happens to the place I live if the temperatures go up by 0.5? What happens if it goes up by 1.5 degrees? What happens if we overshoot and go up by 2? Or even in the case of Schneider Electric, within that factory, they're able to actually assemble a PLC, programmable logic control, if I remember it, just a key component of a factory, so that they're always able to do something within there. And then the third thing that we're seeing in the future of collaboration is making sure that no industry is addressing something on their own. It's not just up to the scientists to address climate change. It's not just up to governments to make sure that the energy transition is successful and sustainable. It's not just up to business to make sure that AI is leveraged in a way that's beneficial for all of society. So those are our goals, and we're going to say hand on heart. I'm here with my colleague Devesh in the really cool jacket. We're hoping that at the end of this discussion, we can have more connections, find out the work that you're all doing, and seeing if we can find intersections to progress these purpose-driven aims. The clock is showing me I've got 1 minute and 30 seconds. So if there's a question, I can take in 1.5 minutes, but otherwise we're around the whole afternoon. How do questions go? I see a hand up here. I don't think there's a mic. Go ahead.
Should I just shout?
I think so. Gabby, should he just shout? Okay, go ahead, just shout. I'll repeat it.
Well, first one, thanks for all of this.
Sure.
Is it accessible, the Climate Tipping Hub? Can people just access it from wherever right now? Is it like online?
That's a great question.
That's the first question. The
Yes.
second one is, it's more of a framing question, is in climate tipping points and then planetary boundaries. Would it be more strategical to have a hub that is all about planetary boundaries rather than tipping points?
Right, okay.
Funnily enough, I would say that's something I'm working on, but I also think this is something that's actually going to be built.
Absolutely.
Physical space. I really, it's awesome.
Perfect.
Doing.
Okay, so the first question was about accessibility. Can everyone get in? And the answer is, since we're in Austria, I'll say jein, which means ja and nein, a combination, yes and no. The way you access it usually is through events and by being a constituent of, for example, one of the partners that we've talked about. So you may be able to access it, you may not. That's a conversation you would have. Reach out to us. The question about should we talk about planetary boundaries, we are always iterating. We have a team called the Center for Nature and Climate, who are the people who are actually responsible for making sure the data is robust, the content is accurate, and is based on actual science. So those conversations are ongoing. And again, reach out, and we're very happy to continue that talk. And I've got 3 seconds left. I did it, guys. Yay. Thank you so much for your attention.